It was the kind of weekend you read about in a novel, the kind of quiet escape you imagine when life feels like it's spinning out of control. But the twist is, I wasn't looking for an escape, I didn't even know I needed one. I'm Mark, and this is the story of a weekend that turned everything I thought I knew about myself and my relationships upside down. The sun was just dipping below the horizon when I pulled up to the cabin. A secluded little retreat, tucked away in the woods by a shimmering lake, far from any city lights or the noise of everyday life. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, and the kind of stillness that makes you wonder if you've just stepped into a different world. The cabin, small but charming, looked like something straight out of a painting. Wooden walls, a stone fireplace, and large windows that framed the surrounding trees like a living canvas. This wasn't just any trip, it was a chance to reconnect with someone who had been an important part of my life for longer than I realized. My wife, Emily, was away on a business trip, leaving me with an unexpected free weekend. So when my stepmother, Laura, invited me to join her at the cabin, I didn't think twice. Why not? It had been years since we had a moment to ourselves, just the two of us. And besides, I never passed up an opportunity to enjoy her company. I stepped out of the car, stretching my legs as the evening breeze swept through the trees. The world felt distant out here, like it was holding its breath. Laura was already there, waiting on the front porch. A smile spread across her face when she saw me, and I couldn't help but return it. She looked at me with that same warmth, that easygoing kindness that I had always admired. It wasn't just that she was my stepmother, she was someone who had always been there for me, even when I didn't realize I needed it. As I walked up to her, she gave me a hug, pulling me into a tight embrace. It was as if we hadn't missed a beat, despite the years that had passed. "I'm so glad you're here," she said, her voice soft but genuine. "It's been too long." We walked into the cabin together, and I immediately felt that familiar sense of calm wash over me. The fireplace crackled softly in the background, and the space felt like a sanctuary, like the world outside didn't matter anymore. It was just us. I could hear the faint sound of the lake lapping against the shore outside, and I thought, for the first time in a long time, that this was exactly what I needed. Laura had always had a way of making everything feel simple, easy. It didn't matter what was going on in my life, when she was around, it always felt like I could breathe again. We'd always had a special bond. Sure, she was my stepmother, but over the years, she'd become so much more. She'd been a mentor, a friend, and at times, a mother when I needed one most. There was something about her presence that grounded me. Her laughter was easy, infectious, and it always made the world feel like a less complicated place. And so, with the soft glow of the fire casting dancing shadows on the walls, we began unpacking and getting settled in. Laura had already made sure the place was cozy, preparing everything down to the smallest detail. The firewood was stacked neatly by the hearth, the wine chilled in the fridge, and the cabin smelled like the kind of homey, woodsy scent that immediately put your mind at ease. "You remember the first time we came up here?" she asked, breaking my thoughts as she unpacked a bag of snacks. "You were a teenager, grumpy, as usual, complaining about everything. And here you are now, a grown man. Still grumpy, but at least you don't complain as much." I chuckled. "Some things never change." She winked at me, and for a brief moment, I was reminded of those years when Laura had been there for me, not just as a stepmother, but as someone who genuinely cared. It hit me in that moment, how much she had shaped my life, how much I had come to rely on her quiet wisdom. The thought was a little overwhelming, and I found myself lost in the nostalgia of it all. But then I stopped myself. There was no reason to get sentimental. This was just another weekend with Laura, right? Another easy, relaxed trip, like all the others. Or so I thought. As the evening stretched on, the cabin grew quieter, save for the occasional crackle from the fire. We sat together at the wooden dining table, where Laura had already set the table with an effortlessly charming touch, fresh herbs in a tiny vase, candles flickering in the dim light, and a modest meal of roasted vegetables and pasta that smelled so good it made my stomach growl. Laura poured us each a glass of wine, the deep red liquid shimmering in the low light. She smiled at me, that familiar, warm smile that had always made me feel at ease. We clinked glasses, a simple gesture that felt heavier than usual. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us. Maybe it was the wine, maybe it was the serenity of the place, or maybe it was the years of unspoken emotions between us that were starting to surface. So, she began, after a few moments of comfortable silence, "Tell me about work. You're doing well, I assume." I smiled at her, a little embarrassed. "It's fine. You know how it is, never as exciting as you'd like it to be, but it pays the bills." She tilted her head, considering me. That's the problem with success. Sometimes, we get stuck in the grind and forget to ask ourselves if we're actually happy. Are you happy, Mark? The question hit me like a wave, and I wasn't sure how to answer. Was I happy? I liked my job well enough, but I wasn't sure if that was enough anymore. I think I'm just figuring it out, I said, trying to brush the question aside with a nervous laugh. Laura gave me a knowing look. You're always figuring it out. But I've seen you grow, you know. It's a beautiful thing, watching you become who you are. Her words struck me deeper than I expected. There was an intensity to her gaze that I couldn't quite place. I wanted to say something in return, to thank her, to express how much her support had meant over the years, but then my throat went dry. Instead, I took a sip of wine, trying to mask the uncomfortable knot that had suddenly formed in my chest. Building tension. The conversation shifted, moving toward the past. Laura and I reminisced about family trips, moments of laughter, and small victories from when I was a teenager. I could see her eyes light up as she spoke, the warmth in her voice a reminder of the deep bond we shared. But I couldn't shake the growing sense of unease gnawing at me. It wasn't just the nostalgia or the wine, it was something else. Something I couldn't name. As we spoke, I started noticing things that felt different. The way her hand lingered on my arm when she laughed at one of my jokes, the warmth in her smile when our eyes met. Her gestures were casual, but they felt too intimate, too familiar, and something inside me stirred. My pulse quickened, and my mind went into overdrive, trying to rationalize it. "Remember when you used to hate fishing?" she asked, breaking my thoughts as I stared into the fire. "You'd always complain about getting your hands dirty, and now you're the one who handles the bait." I chuckled, but it was strained. "Yeah, well, I had to grow up, right?" Laura smiled softly, her eyes lingering on me for a moment longer than usual. It wasn't a look of amusement, it was a look of connection. There was an unspoken weight to the silence that followed. For a fleeting second, the world outside the cabin seemed to disappear. Was it just the cabin? Just the atmosphere? Or was something more complicated happening here? My mind raced. I tried to distract myself by focusing on the fire, the crackling wood, but the pull between us was becoming impossible to ignore. We spent the rest of the evening by the fireplace, telling stories, talking about everything and nothing. But even as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was simmering beneath the surface. Every touch, every look between us seemed charged with a new energy, something that felt dangerous. At one point, I stood up to fetch another bottle of wine. As I passed her, Laura reached out and gently brushed my arm. I froze. "Mark," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. "I've always been proud of you. You've done so well for yourself." The weight of her words hit me harder than I expected. Her touch lingered for a second longer than necessary, sending a jolt of something unspoken straight to my chest. I felt the heat rising in my face. Was she just being kind, or was there something more there? I wasn't sure, but I could feel the air between us change, thickening with unvoiced tension. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Thanks, Laura," I said, trying to smile as I moved toward the kitchen. But even as I walked away, I felt her eyes on me, following me with an intensity one wasn't sure how to process. I couldn't let myself think about it, but I couldn't stop either. Later that night, after we'd finished dinner and the last bottle of wine had been drained, Laura and I sat in silence, side by side on the couch. The fire had burned low, the room now bathed in soft shadows. There was a moment when the stillness between us felt suffocating. I could feel her presence next to me like a magnet pulling me closer, but I couldn't move. "Mark," she said again, her voice a little shakier this time, as if she was unsure of what to say next. "There's something I need to tell you." I turned to look at her, my breath catching in my throat. This wasn't just a casual conversation anymore. Her gaze locked onto mine, and I could see something in her eyes that I couldn't quite understand. I think I've always loved you," she said quietly. My heart stopped. The words hung in the air like a bomb about to explode, and for a long moment, I didn't know how to respond. Was she serious? Was this some kind of joke? I could feel my chest tighten, the weight of her confession pressing on me like a suffocating force. But I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, staring into her eyes, trying to process what had just been said. It felt like hours passed before I finally found my voice. "Laura," my mind scrambled for the right words, but nothing came. "You're my stepmother. This isn't right." She nodded slowly, her expression resigned but understanding. "I know," she said softly. "I just had to say it. I never wanted you to feel burdened by it. But sometimes, the truth has a way of finding its way to the surface." I sat there, the weight of her words settling into my chest. I felt a surge of emotion, confusion, guilt, but most of all, relief. We had crossed a line, but it was a line that didn't need to be crossed. It had been a fleeting moment, but it had forced me to confront something important. Boundaries are what keep relationships intact, what keep us from losing our way. The next morning, as we packed up the cabin, the tension between us had lifted, replaced by a quiet understanding. We didn't speak much about the night before. We didn't need to. When I drove back home, the world felt different. I was different. The weekend had opened my eyes to the complexities of love, of family, and of the unspoken connections that shape who we are. Sometimes, the most unexpected moments force us to confront the complexity of our emotions, our relationships, and our boundaries. What feels like a simple connection can reveal deeper truths about ourselves and the people we care about. It's not always easy to navigate these feelings, but it's important to remember that true love and loyalty are built on respect, trust, and clear boundaries. When we honor those, we not only protect our relationships but also grow stronger in the process. So, what do you think? Have you ever had a moment where everything you thought you knew about someone changed? Where you had to confront emotions you didn't understand? Let me know in the comments, I'd love to hear your thoughts.